abandonment feels like a really intense word, but being abandoned by choice, by half of yourself. I mean, it's hard not to have questions about what that reflects back on you. And I sure carried that. I carried that sense of being the reason why people left. And I misinterpreted our first stepdad, Tom's leaving, as something that was my fault, like a lack on my part. And again, multiple times throughout my childhood, I kind of thought that there must be some inherent flaw in me that made people not want me.
Welcome to And Then Everything Changed, a podcast about the pivotal moments in life and decisions that define us. I'm your host, Ronit Plank. Today, my very special guests are sisters. Kima Waterfield, who's the author of Inside Passage, a nomadic childhood memoir set along the wild coast of Southeast Alaska. Other work of Kima's has appeared in the New York Times, Wired, Brevity, Redivider, and others. Her sister, Tekla Waterfield, is a singer-songwriter who incorporates elements of folk, country, roots, rock, and soul, creating a wide-ranging sound unified by dynamic vocals, compelling stage presence, and point-of-view storytelling. Waterfield's music has been heard on radio stations throughout the U.S., on NPR's World Cafe, in the U.K., Scotland, Wales, and Australia, England, and Korea, and has been described as poignant and emotionally soaring by No Depression magazine. Waterfield's most recent release, New Skies, landed in the NACC Top 30 Folk Album charts in October of 2021. Welcome, Keema and Tekla.
Thank you, Ronit. Hi.
So listeners will now know that both of the Waterfield sisters sound very similar, and this will become even more apparent when we listen to a cut of their song. I want to thank you so much for being here and to let everyone know that I'm acquainted with Kima because of our writing. Our memoirs came out around the same time in early summer or I guess late spring. And I have read Inside Passage, which is Kima's memoir, and I got to work on it for a piece for the Rumpus, which we'll link to along with her book and the music that we play in the show notes. Kima, meeting you has been a gift of this past year, and I am so happy that Tekla was able to join us today too, to bring your sister energy and story to the show. So for people who are not familiar with Inside Passage or with your story, Kima, can you begin a little bit and tell us a little bit about the background of your family?
We grew up with a single mom, living a fairly nomadic artist's life in Southeast Alaska. We moved a lot. We have a lot of family throughout Southeast Alaska. So we kind of bounced around between towns and even within towns between homes, and spent a lot of our early years traveling by ferry and car and camping and performing at folk festivals from a really early age together, Tekla and mom and I. Usually when we were little, we were, surprise backup or like surprise guests with mom during her shows. And then it sort of grew from there, where Tekla and I did our own sets, and then later traveled on a grant with the Alaska Arts Council on the ferries as were we artists in residence, Tekla, or I can't remember.
I don't know. We were so
Yeah,
little.
it was so long ago, and we got to kind of feel a little like stars because we had our own performance as part of the tour, and then for a stretch of time we didn't see each other or perform together for a long piece of time in our lives.
Mm-hmm. So am I right in saying that your early childhood was a very nest-like, womb-like experience for the two of you together?
Yes.
Like in terms of the closeness and the proximity?
Yeah, Tekla and I were so close in age. We're 14 months apart. And we were a small little unit, mom, Tekla, and me. Tekla and I don't know if you always felt this way, Tekla, or if it was just me because I'm an older sister, but I felt like we were indistinguishable from each other. From a really early age, I thought Tekla was mostly just an extension of myself.
I think you write about that too a little bit in Inside Passage. Tekla, what's your thought on that? Did you have any kind of a similar experience?
Well, we looked and sounded alike, and we were close in the same height for quite a while. So yeah, people just were like, "Which one are you?" Like we just look, we look like little twins. We were born so close together, and we were just mom would dress us like twins when we were little, and so we had, we went through all the same things, which is, we were right around the same age. We're just a little over a year apart. So yeah, there was a lot of that. And then as we got older, we really kind of during our teenage years, we really went different directions for a while. But yeah, that we've come back together, I think. But that's fun. Do you know what I'm saying, Kima? Like we used to fight a lot when we were teenagers.
Is that when you started to fight? I mean, it's so common among siblings. I didn't become close again with my sister until college. When I went to college and came back, I was like a little nicer to her.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a stage. So for me, it's funny because when I was younger, I was bossy, but I thought I was the same person as my sister into my 30s. It wasn't until someone said, you're different, that I really understood that we really were different. Like I thought because we had the same experience growing up that we actually had the same experience.
Right.
But it's so different based on birth order and personality.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would say that there's a real distinguishing feature here. We did bicker, but we were still really tightly bound. I mean, we fought even as little kids all the time. I mean, we were mortal frenemies. But we also didn't have anyone else, and nothing could really ever keep us from each other. So like we'd have a difference of opinion about like what we wanted to do with our time. But I think for the most part, we weren't upset about spending time with each other. And even as our identities really separated into our teen years, a lot of that was regional. I was back up in Alaska and Tekla was still in Seaside, California. Um, and we were experiencing, a different geographical experience during our teen years. So, identifying who we were in the world was always going to um, change us. And it just happened to be that our environment had a big hand in keeping, like, adding a gap between our understanding of each other. Um, but even all those years where we were apart, and this was before cell phones and internet, um, I never felt like our bond was shaken. Our bond never took a hike. It was still there. When I saw Tekla, it was, immediately and profoundly true that I was with this other part of myself.
And I do, it's very easy for me to want to ask about the logistics, and I do know some of them from the book, but I'm gonna hold off my need for organization and we'll get back to that in a second so we can have a better understanding of the chronology and the timeline of your childhood. But music festivals, right? Some people go to them all the time, some people don't. And when your earliest memories of the music festivals that you went to, Tekla, and you can answer this too, Kima, but what were your earliest sensations and feelings about those music festivals?
Well, I remember running around, like there'd be square dancing or whatever sometimes, and we'd be just kind of running around all the adults, with the other kids and laughing and just having a good time. And, when we sang with the adults, with our mom and her friends and stuff, I mean, it was just sort of like natural. It just felt like totally, this is what we're doing. This is just what we do in our family. It didn't feel like, strange. I mean, I'm sure there were stage fright moments, of like, oh my gosh, but I don't know. It just felt natural. It was fun. And it was like, I mean, we were just little festival brats. We were always there, we were just, and we'd camp out and mom would have us, she made these wreaths, out of like, or garlands, I don't know, whatever they're called, with like mossy and moss and like flowers and ribbons. And we would walk around at the fairs like, who wants to buy one? Our mom made these. And, you know, we were just these little kids that just like were a fixture of those kinds of scenes. And it was fun. And there were times a little bit later towards more like teenage years when I was embarrassed of my mom because she was so unafraid to be, you know, expressive and to be really expressive.
What does that conjure for you?
Well, there was this one time when she was singing with a band that she was singing with out in Juneau, out at Sandy, or one of the beaches out there, and we had some friends there. And I remember I must have been in like 6th or 7th grade, and she did this, oh baby now kind of thing, and like me and my friends were just laughing so hard. And like, I still say that now and I'm like 40. I'm like, oh, baby, now. Like, cause it just was, I was so embarrassed because my mom was so like, you know, not like other moms and very, you know, out there. And I don't know.
Like she was just like very unafraid to show her passion and her creativity.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. But it's funny because when you okay, so obviously we can only offer a little snapshot of your whole lives and art on this interview. But when I think about children, okay, so Keema knows this from my book, but I was a pretty tightly wound child and very much always looking for safety. You know, am I safe? Is it safe? How am I going to be safe? And so me knowing what I was like, my first instinct about a music festival is like, I could never be that loose. I could never be that untethered. I don't think I could have done it. Right. Did you feel safe in that environment? And also my follow-up to that is that you seem creative and expressive and free that way just from knowing what you were doing. So it's funny to me that you thought your mom was was a little embarrassing, because to me, you're living this artistic dream.
Yeah. Well, I think it takes growing up and getting over trying to be cool and all that. I got caught up in that for quite a while. Like I was like, oh, you know, I don't want to be unliked. I don't want to be unpopular. I need to go with the flow. I was always like that. Keema was more like the rebel without a cause. You know, she shaved her head and had a very FU attitude for certain years of her young adult. And I was more like, I need to like make everyone like me. And, you know, I don't know. But once you get over that, or I got over that, you know, like I was in choir in high school, and our choir teacher would encourage us to be expressive and to think about what we were singing and to feel it and to show it, to let it be seen and that it was okay. And of course, then like, you know, freshman year, I was like, oh my God, no way. That's so lame. That's like not cool. But then by senior year, and then, you know, as I got older, I was feeling it. I was like opening up that because there's this like expressive like portal that if you're able to just like let it be open and flow, like, and just let it happen, it's just like the most amazing feeling as it goes through your body and it comes out, and like as other people feel it, and you know, and my mom's totally got that. That's where I get it from. But yeah, as a kid, it's a different thing. You don't quite understand all that usually. Most kids don't, you know.
Do you feel that your childhood with your mom was one that you can look back on with peaceful feelings, or are they complicated?
I think they're complicated. I mean, we had a lot of love and a lot of, you know, unique experiences and interesting adventures, and times when our mom would just be like, all right, we're getting in the car, we're going to drive all night, we're going to look for the northern lights or whatever. And it was like, you know, it was like cool, you know, but at times it was hard because we had so much instability. We had different father figures, different, you know, there were different boyfriends. And I mean, it was like, you know, there were times when we just really had barely any food or any clothes that we needed. And, you know, it was hard, but like when you're a kid and you experience all that, you don't really quite know what you're missing, you know, until like there's times where, you know, other kids have stuff and you're like, well, why don't I have any of that stuff? But, you know, as I've gotten older, that I've been more like, wow, you know, like that's crazy. Some of the stuff that, you know, we went through.
I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And Keema, you know, feel free to add to this as well. When you think of the stranger or more complicated stuff that you went through, what comes to mind?
Well, yeah, this is definitely something that I wrote into in the book. Yes, we were raised in artistic poverty. Our mom worked really hard. She worked incredibly hard. And it's worth noting, she was barely 20 when I was
Mm.
born, and my father was 20 years older than her. And very quickly, he was out of the picture just after Tekla was born. He was a pot dealer in Anchorage, Alaska, in an era where it carried consequences. And when mom had said, this isn't gonna work, I'm scared of losing the girls. I need you to get a real job. And he chose not to. And then after a raid on the trailer that Tekla and I were born in, she realized that despite his promises, he had not followed through, and that it was just too risky. So she took off with us girls to Petersburg first, where she had spent her high school years with her family, grandma and her uncles, and her brothers and sister. So mom was really young. She was unpartnered. She'd grown up in a family dynamic that was abusive herself and had gone through a tremendous amount of childhood trauma, which
Mhm.
in the 80s, wasn't something that was really being addressed. And she was in rural Alaska without, you know, any supports as a single mom or like mental health supports. And I think that those challenges, I feel in telling my story, I've shared a lot of my mom's story, and I have done the best that I could to tell it with her permission and with her voice. But I think that it's important to say that mom was still kind of a kid having kids
Mhm.
in the 80s in rural Alaska. And yeah, she wanted to pursue art and music. And she was curious about what kind of beautiful things that she could experience in the world. And so she
Mhm.
would work multiple part-time jobs so that she didn't have to go sit at a desk and give up the dream of herself. And
Mhm.
I think that writer mothers still kind of do that, artist mothers still have to do that. Just that the opportunities available to her were smaller. And so we were exposed to a lot of beauty and a lot of creativity, and some hardship. She wasn't she she wasn't prepared when she met a pedophile. She didn't know, what to look for in the signs
Mhm.
of an abuser. And so the harms, that we experienced were never ever intentional, and they were always cared for. We were always held.
Mhm.
Mom made sure that we knew that she was our safe space. She couldn't protect us
Mhm.
from everything, but she would always hold us through it.
Mhm.
And I think that the strength that she gave us was in the knowledge that we were always going to get through this together, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Did it did it take you any time to come to this conclusion for either of you? I mean, I'm curious, having read Kima's memoir, I've sort of had spent some time in her head. Tekla, I know that you had a different experience, because you're a different person, but did you go through various phases of understanding your childhood? Have you always been pretty consistently viewing it the same, or what's your thoughts about your childhood?
Well, I I don't know. Kima was. We were talking last night, and she's like, You're the way that you process things is like you kind of have to sort of go inside, and it takes you a long time." And I sort of feel the same way still. Like, um, I don't think about it all that much intentionally, unless I really, you know, something happens. Like we used to say, like we'd watch movies where there'd be a father and a daughter, Keema and and we would both just like start crying, just like bawling for
Mhm.
a while. I don't
Still.
really do that as much anymore. Like I think a big part of that is because I found my life partner personally for
Mhm.
me, who is filling this void that I always had, in a way with his, his manliness and his, who he is and how much he loves me. But when I was younger, I didn't really process it or think about it or understand like, oh, I'm a little girl without a dad. And it's just like, it's just
Mm-hmm.
later when you go about life that you're like, oh, gosh, like maybe I'd be different. Maybe I'd be more secure in
Mm-hmm.
myself or more confident. I have a lot of confidence issues and insecurity issues and not good enough issues. I mean, everybody does, but as far as like, uh, you know, our childhood um, with mom, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just like it is what it is. That's kind of my attitude, right,
Yeah.
Kima? Right,
Hmm.
Kima? That's kind of
Yeah.
how I am. I'm like, well, it is what it is. So move on.
Mm. But did you ever get to a point where you felt like you had to process it, or do you feel like the music that you write has done that for you? I mean, Kima has. It's also on a side note. I'm going to like stumble over all my questions because I have so much I want to say to you and ask. But it's interesting, right? Because the artist in you does have to express this, and it comes out in this way, right?
Hmm.
I don't know how you would process it if you weren't artistic, if you weren't creative, if you weren't writing and singing.
Hmm.
But I mean, I I wonder when you realized, Tekla, this is for both of you then, for Tekla, when you realized, wow, I'm writing songs that are evocative of what I lost or what is on my mind about this. And when Kima knew she was going to write a book about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think either of us really intentionally set out to, well, I know I didn't set out to be a songwriter per se. I just knew that I had a voice and I've been interested in writing in like, in reading, and it just sort of happened. And yes, I think it's absolutely a form of therapy. And also, I don't know if you know this, but I have written a young adult novel that is based on part of our childhood from that time period where we moved from Alaska to California. And I have to say that I do remember when I was writing it that it was feeling like, whoa, I was really sort of confronting all of these feelings
Mm-hmm.
about everything when I was working on that. But yeah, every time that you create something, we're telling stories, like Kima's telling a story and I'm telling stories with songs. Yeah, you can't help but, there's plenty of songs that I've written that are about love or about like, missing someone or about friendships. But yeah, there have been songs where I've, explored like, feelings of hurt or abandonment or, sadness over things that happen with parentals. But
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Kima, in terms of when you decided to write this book?
Yeah, I was thinking about, um, I remember when I was first on my own, talking to Tekla, and she would say, I don't understand why you're mad. And we were young. I mean, I was 14, she was 13, and I don't understand why you're mad. And I would say, well, I'm not mad at mom. I am mad that I can't be at home. And I'm mad at Brian. Um, but these things happened in our life, and they're hard things. And even then, Tekla was still like, well, it happened. And I was like, yes, and it happened to us. And I
Mhm.
somehow have to, figure out what it means to hold them. Um, and then, it was maybe, a decade and a half later when Tekla was like, these things did happen. Holy cram. All along. They really had happened. Oh, okay. And that was a really amazing conversation when we finally did have it. As far as writing the book, I didn't actually know I was writing a book when I wrote my first few essays. They were about Dude, our father. They
Mm.
were really about I was trying to get curious about his absence and what it meant when the formative half of yourself chooses not to be with you. And really, I had a lot of questions about whether that meant I was the kid worth staying for, or the kid, in mom's case, or the kid
Mm-hmm.
worth leaving in dad's case, and um, who you can be without that formative influence, of like
Mm-hmm.
your solid father figure. Because all around me, I saw so many kids who, even in divorce, still had their father in their lives, and abandonment feels like a really intense word, but being abandoned by choice by half of yourself. I mean, it's hard not to have questions about what that reflects back
Sure.
on you. And I sure carried that. I carried that sense of being the reason why people left. And I misinterpreted our first stepdad, Tom's leaving, as something that was my fault, like a lack on my part. And again, multiple times throughout my childhood, I kind of thought that there must be some inherent flaw in me that made people not want me, and not want
Mm-hmm.
to like carry through on this journey with me. And that's something I struggled with way
Mm-hmm.
into adulthood, deep into adulthood. I don't anymore, but that has
Mm-hmm.
definitely had a long-term impact. So I wrote the very first essay that is like at the end of the book when I was in undergrad, and it was like the first essay I ever wrote. And I wasn't planning on writing a memoir. And then I used it to apply to my MFA program, and there, my thesis advisor kept asking for more, and I kept writing more. And by the time I graduated, I had roughly 100 pages, much of which I used, not all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, if you don't write a memoir, what a waste of your story and your talent. I really, and she actually shook her fist at me, like, I'm expecting you to do something about this. Otherwise, I don't know if I don't know if I would have. I had a different project in mind. So one of the things I struggled with was I didn't want to really write into the traumas and hardships because the cumulative feeling I have about our childhood and about my mother is really great love. I mean, deep affection, great love. And yes, hardships happened. Um, And then I realized that in order to be true to who I am and the experiences and that occurred, and especially the anxiety, which hit me, pretty young in my early in my teen years,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't be myself on the page without also acknowledging that I was shaped by these early traumas. Um, and so I actually had to, reach a point where I acknowledged that it needed to be in the story, despite the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I would have loved to write just a funny, uplifting,
Mm-hmm.
romp through folk festivals and along the wet beaches in Alaska, and like Tekla and me telling fart jokes until mom pees her pants. Like, I would have, that's what I wanted to do. And then it turned out that in order to be true to myself, I couldn't do it without, revealing the hard parts too.
I think Kima's familiar with. I talk and think a lot about and write a lot about, adverse childhood experiences and abandonment issues and the effect, the legacy of insecure attachments and an insecure attachment with your parent is when a child doesn't feel secure. And that can be because of a physical distance or an emotional distance. A parent can be there and not all the way be there. And that can create this sort of behavior and deficiency in a kid. And so I'm really eager to learn about that. And of course, going back to what Tekla said a while ago, I didn't understand this growing up. This is stuff I learned later. It's not stuff I could process at the time because it's not safe when you're going through something like that, at least in my experience, to really understand what's happening because there's nowhere to go. But as I got older, I did understand it. And so I try to use what I know now to try to help the other part of me that didn't know then, sort of, right? So do you feel like there's anything a parent can do when one parent is physically gone, like your father is physically gone and was out of the picture? Do you feel like there's anything your mom could have done differently to help fill that part of you? And this is for both of you. Do you see any way that emptiness or insecurity, that sense of abandonment, could have been sort of assuaged by something your mom could have done in her life with you?
That is such an interesting question. And I don't know if I have a ready answer for that. Tekla, do you?
Well, I mean, I think every mother or every parent in this situation would have there would be a different answer, a different scenario just based on what they were going through and who that person is. And our mom she's an artist, and she was always sort of, just kind of, Keema and I were just talking about this when we had a phone call the other night about how she's just kind of like on a different plane sometimes, where it's like, there'd be times where I'd be like, "What do you think, Mom?" And she's like, "I think you should just do whatever you feel is right." And that's it. Like, she's like hands off. And so there were a lot of ways that she was really like, some parents like kind of force feed their kids the answers, and they like make them kind of pin them down, and make them be what they want. And our mom was like, "I want you to be what you are and who you are, and just do that. Just go do it. Just go." So I don't, I don't, it's hard to sort of say what she could have done, because she was doing what was natural for her as a mother and as a human being, like when she was telling us how to be and who we were. And she was very encouraging, and she was always like, you know, she didn't make us feel bad for being who we are ever. I think there's just this different sort of like set of encouragement and things that you get from a different the other parent, that like it's just a different, like, I know I struggled for years with problems with bad relationships and falling for the wrong guys and being like obsessive about guys, because I was just needing like a male in my life so bad. I mean, there were years of just like terrible, just it took me so long to like be okay with not having that, or to like understand what I was doing, and I don't know how Mom could have.
Yeah. And, I feel, I don't know, Kima, if that was similar for you at all, but I feel the same way. So, I definitely was looking in the wrong places for that kind of validation. I don't know that my father could have done something for me because I had the opposite parent missing. I don't know, but I do know that I think that a couple of words, maybe things that seemed implicit, like things that seemed obvious to him, if he had been more explicit about it, like maybe your mom didn't go because of you, or you must be sad because they're not here. Things like that, right? And those are just small and elementary things. And there were things that we just, no parent can do everything. There's always going to be gaps, and I'm sure I'm going to hear about them for my kids as they get older. That's just the nature, I feel, of parenting. Something that I try to do a lot in my parenting is to make sure my kids know where they stand with me. And, I don't think they could accuse me of a lot of things, but I don't think being kind of phoning it in or not being present for them is one of them. And so that's the kind of thing that I feel like we're trying to heal when, perhaps we're going after the wrong relationships or looking for another person to complete us. But sometimes it takes another person who loves you so much to help you see that you really are okay the way you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Mom had grown up with a philosophy that you had to be partnered, or you were maybe some kind of failure as a woman, and especially as a mother. And so I think that pushed her to consider partners that she wouldn't have, because she was really, really wanting someone to raise her kids with and to feel safe with, and to, you know, match her where she was at. And
I
I
don't feel
think
that way, Kima. I think she
you
just
don't
fell
think
in
so?
love. I think she just would fall in love and fall out of love over and over. And her grandma's the
Yeah,
same.
yeah, I can see that too. Yeah, and I mean, I think that that is an echo of the same experience that you're describing, because her father was gone. She was abandoned by her father. Her adopted dad also, when they divorced, was very far away. And so, she grew up with that hole in her life. Um, and I think that might be part of it. I will
Mm-hmm.
say, I think it's really hard to guess what mom could have done differently. And yes, I think hearing, dude's not a part of our life because there's anything wrong with you might have been very helpful. It wasn't something people were saying in during
Mm-mm.
divorce then or to kids then.
Mm-mm.
So
Mm-mm.
I feel like that would have been a huge leap for her to make, like it wouldn't have been intuitive to her because certainly no one was teaching her that language, so she wasn't picking it up anywhere. I, and she was sure, I mean, absolutely sure to always tell us that she loved us unconditionally and that
Mm-hmm.
who we were didn't change her love at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, she always did use the words unconditionally too. I love you
Mm-hmm.
unconditionally. And
Mm-hmm.
I credit that for, you know, what I would say the overwhelming resilience that Tekla and I have between the two of us. I would say that having that sure knowledge has carried us in ways that um, we wouldn't probably have been able to come so far without it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but if she had been able to, make more sacrifices possibly and like, you know, settle down into like a steady gig and keep us in a place for a really long stretch of time and let us like feel deeply secure and woven into a place. I think that that might have had an impact on our sense of sureness in ourselves, and I think that it would have been a devastation to her you know
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that that would have broken part of her spirit, and who knows
Mm-hmm.
how that would have impacted
Right,
us
affected
later.
her mothering. Right, exactly. I mean, we
Yeah,
just never know because it all
yeah.
has an effect. What's the relationship with your mother now for the two of you?
Oh, super close. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when you were writing your book, and Kima, when you were writing your book, and when you told Tekla and you told your mom and stuff, what was the reaction?
Tekla was like, "Whoa, that's exciting," and wow, I can't believe anyone would want to read a book about our childhood. Oh yeah, actually, I can see why. And mom's was pride. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
mom was like, amazing. Of course you're a writer. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I should have realized you would write about it all, but I mean, yes, of course you're a writer.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it hasn't always been easy on her heart because so much of my story is her story, especially due to our age difference, which is so small. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it has never been without love and support. I mean, she's just always said, I support you. You're an artist. And again,
Mm-hmm.
it comes back to that unconditional love. She's capable of seeing us as who we are and recognizes that we're separate from her and that our story linked is separate from hers too.
So I was going to ask before we listen to this cut from the Granite Creek Pickers Retreat in Alaska. I was going to ask you about this time in your teenage years. You said you were apart, and maybe it was in your 20s too. You said it had been a really long time. You were apart for a little while, and
Mhm.
then it seems like it was a while before you sang again. So I don't know this part of your story at all. I mean, I know part of the living separately, but not about the time that went between singing and performing together.
Yeah, so I do write about this in the book. There's a period of deep mental hardship for our mom that happened to coincide with my freshman year in high school. And she had a new partner in her life, Brian, who really didn't like us kids very much. And he had her convinced that, you know, mm, that she needed to just sort of take a break from the world for a while, and kind of, kept her in her room.
But
And
also
he
her
was,
father had died, remember,
her
right at that
father had
time
died.
too.
Yep, there was grief, and then there was her childhood traumas bubbling up to the surface, and then there was Brian, for whom it was a wonderful thing to have her a little bit helpless and captive. And one of the things he did was convinced her that I was a danger to her, because I was angry about, yet another move, this new guy. I was starting high school in California when I'd been raised in rural Alaska. I was very confused and lonely, and scared, and didn't know what I was going to do. And I couldn't talk to mom because she was very, very deep in her grief at the time. And so Brian convinced her that I was not safe to her, and got her to kick me out. And so uh, a lot of conversations about what that would look like happened. I wound up going up to Anchorage to live with our older half brother, who I didn't really know at all. He was a stranger to me in his late 20s, and we had an apartment together, which we shared. We shared a single bed, but he worked nights, and I was at school, and I worked in the evenings, so we didn't really see each other. I just like paid my rent, and sometimes he was home on the weekend watching football, and or his buddies would come over and get really drunk, or go on a coke binge and try to break down the bedroom door, which was occasionally strange. But I was on my own for a good stretch of time then, for maybe about a year and a half. And in that time, I went and lived with my friend's family, who are still family to me now. I'm super close with them. And then I reconnected with mom briefly, for about 6 months. And then by the time I was halfway done with my junior year in high school, I was completely on my own forever after. And we pretty much have never lived in the same town again, as each other. So we, again, this was, cell phones, no internet, we could have occasionally afford a long distance phone call, but she lived states away. Sometimes I wouldn't hear from her for an entire year. And not, by any lack of love, just we couldn't afford a long distance phone call. And, I couldn't just like book a ticket and go visit whenever I wanted to. I was, working, 4 part-time jobs myself, trying to pay my way through college. So there was just a really long gap before we reached a point for either one of us where we had enough stability that we could like make visits happen more regularly. And it was a long
And that means
time.
you and Tekla too. You and Tekla were separate too.
Right. Yep. Tekla was with mom. And so I didn't really see as much of Tekla either. It would be sometimes 2 years, maybe 3 years between visits with each other. So yeah, the music when we came back together was actually, I think it was inspired by our brother settling down and having a baby. And we all came together for the birth of my niece. And we found out about a festival, just like the way mom used to do when we were little. She'd be like, holy cow, I found out about a festival. Let's go. And we would just go. And there we were for the first time. And I think it was, 15 years at a festival, all of a sudden together again, with like very little practice, a long time between.
And how was it?
Amazing. It was amazing. It was like coming home.
All towboats filling up barges on a long hot summer day. summer day. For every day I work on the Illinois River, get a half a day off with pay. All the towboats filling up barges on a long hot summer day. For supper tonight, it'll be chicken consomme and a mason jar of iced tea on a long hot summer day. For every day I work on the Illinois River, get a half a day off with pay. All the towboats filling up barges on a long hot summer day. Town when we come down yesterday, and I'm getting off in Alton town on a long hot summer day. For every day I work on the Illinois River, get a half a day off with pay. All the towboats filling up barges on a long hot summer day. Every day I work on the Illinois River, get a half a day off with pay. All the towboats filling up barges on a long hot summer day.
I do still think that it's interesting the way that art took us in different directions. And it was a kind of art that we both, were really deeply involved in childhood, but we both like settled on different parts of it as specialties.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about that. Does your mom still make art?
Yeah. She actually has her first show in a long time coming up in Juneau in December. So just a couple weeks, she's got a new art show opening up. It's photographic collage works, and one of those types of pieces is the cover for my book. I'm super excited for her. Yeah. And music. She still plays music.
So then for you two sisters, I know COVID has taken a real toll on so much, but what are your plans for seeing each other soon or performing together again?
I just need my toddler to get vaccinated. That's all we're waiting for.
Yeah. Well, I think that your music is so beautiful. Your writing is so beautiful. Like, I'm amazed by you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where can people, let's start with Tekla. Tekla, where can people find your music and more out about you?
On lots of interweb sites, like my website, which is really easy because it's my name, teklawaterfield.com. I put up shows and music videos and the albums I've made and links to all kinds of things on there. So that's a good place to start.
Okay, and you're also on some social, right?
Yep.
Like some Instagram too.
Yep.
Okay, and what about you, Kima? Where can people find your book and learn more about your writing?
I also have a website that is my name, kimawaterfield.com. I don't do very much with it. It's sort of just a little fancy placeholder. I am much more active on Instagram because I really enjoy the format of those mini essays and, being able to like put a face to the world and meet other authors. So I'm at Kemosaurus Rex on Instagram, very rarely on Twitter. And yeah.
Okay, so in the show notes, we're going to have all those links. We're going to have the ways in which people can find both of you. And I want to thank you for making the time. You're both so busy, and I know you have little kids at home, Kima, and we have a time difference. And I just want to thank you for both being here with me and for sharing your story.
Thank you so
it's our
much,
pleasure.
Ronit. Yeah,
thank you.
It's really special.
Thank you for listening to And Then Everything Changed. For more on this episode, photos, and other episodes you might like, please visit atecpodcast.com. You can connect with me and learn more about episodes on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram also. Just search for my name, Ronit Plank, RONITPLANK, and you will find all the updates. If you like this podcast, please remember to subscribe and also rate and review so other people can find it. Thank you so much for listening.